Okay, thank you very much for joining us again for another episode of Spacebands webinar series. Today's specialist is a PPE expert. So without further ado, thanks so much for coming on, Peter. Could you tell me a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So my company operates as a consultancy business, specializing in PPE. I've been in the PPE industry for 36 years, so all my working life. And basically I support PPE manufacturers and distributors with things like product design, product compliance, project management, marketing, commercialization of brands.
Cool. And how did you find yourself within that realm those 35 years ago?
I was working in a manufacturing environment and decided I wanted to go into sales, and just coincidentally applied for a job in the PPE industry.
Nice. And then you got stuck thereafter.
Stuck thereafter, indeed.
Cool, nice. But what sort of stuff do you tend to design, or is it everything from goggles to gloves to coats to tech side, or like how general?
I do get involved across lots of different product sectors, but I guess I specialize in respiratory protection, and eye protection, head protection, those sort of areas more than others.
Nice. And then if you're with the PPE manufacturers, have you ever thought about building out your own lines of PPE?
No, not specifically. I really enjoy working with other manufacturers and adding expertise and experience where they perhaps lack in some areas. So yeah, as it's my own business, I tend to do things I enjoy rather than things I don't.
Yeah. This is how life should be. And then, so does your remit often come in on the regulatory side or on the design side, or is it everything and anything in between?
It depends, to be honest, on the year and what's going on. I tend to have some design projects rolling most of the time, but then compliance is probably the most demanded skill that I get requested.
Yeah. And how often do you find compliance changes within the UK? Firstly, like over the course of 35 years, obviously compliance sort of wildly changed, but does it change year to year, or is it more like a generation?
No, new standards take anywhere between 5 and 10 years to develop, so it's quite a slow process and a slow change.
Yeah. And then I guess by the time the changes have come in, it then takes a couple of years for all the products to keep up, and then by the time they're
Indeed.
out, yeah, right.
Yeah, there's an 18-month window once a standard's published for manufacturers to get their products together, and it's not retrospective either. So yeah, you've got time to react and respond to the market.
Cool. And do you tend to just build PPE for the UK specifically, or worldwide?
No, worldwide. I've got clients in the USA, in Australia, in Europe, etc. So yeah, it just depends on where the demand is and how they've heard of me, basically.
Yeah, nice. Do you find that regulation from country to country changes, or the quality control even of the PPE changes from country to country, or generally if something's fit for the UK or the US, it then will kind of have a worldwide application?
So the standards are different across the world. The USA and Europe are the major standards that are demanded around the world, or based upon those two standards, but those two standards actually are quite different. So while some product groups like eye protection, hand protection, you can have one product compliant to both standards. When you get into products like respiratory protection, hearing protection, often they're different enough that the products tend to be different.
Cool. And are the regulatory health and safety bodies, like in the US, would it be OSHA, in the UK, HSE, or is it an entirely different?
Yeah, the regulatory bodies are different in every country in terms of how the market is supported and how the market is audited, I guess, at a user level. And the processes are different. So in Europe, certain products need auditing on a regular basis. In the USA, the audit process is slightly different. So again, it varies a little bit by country and by region and type of product.
Cool. But generally, does the auditing happen at the point of purchase, let's say, so when the PPE is being designed or being distributed, or does it happen instead at the back end once it's being used, and then like an inspection will decipher whether or not the PPE is appropriate for the use case?
So that's a more complicated question than it sounded. So basically, when a manufacturer designs a product and brings it to market, they have to go through a regulatory process to test and verify the product meets the standards. They then get a certificate for a 5-year period. If the product is deemed high risk, for example, respiratory protection, then that manufacturer is audited on an annual or biannual basis. And that could be an audit of the factory and the processes within the factory, and or an audit of the actual product itself where it's retested. At end user level, you essentially do a risk assessment to ascertain what the risk is to the wearer or the user in that process. And then you go through what's called a hierarchy of controls and decide if you can eliminate that risk or if you need to provide a PPE to protect the person. And that's the point you select products based on the risk.
Cool. And does it ever then past that, when an accident happens, an insurance company, let's say, will come and do an investigation on the PPE in particular, or instead?
It does happen, but it's fairly rare. Once you've had, well, if someone's had a major accident, then obviously that's when all the regulatory bodies get involved and the insurance companies get involved, and then, yeah, that's more prevalent. But if no accidents have happened or they're minor, then pretty much that doesn't happen at all.
Sure. I love doing these sessions, but just all of a sudden, like, my expertise just inflates from to ever so slightly bigger. But then, so once you find a trusted piece of PPE and it's working in a market, how do people generally sell it? Does it tend to often be a word of mouth within a particular industry, a particular sector, a particular region, or is it?
Just basically, PPE is typically distributed by distribution businesses, MRO through to safety specialist distributors, and they will influence what the user buys based on what they stock and what they provide to the market, unless the user is demanding a specific brand or specific product, in which case they'll try and source that product at a competitive price. But distributors are very influential in that space because they have a business, they want to turn over products and not stock every brand. So they tend to, supply products that they believe in and trust. And, there's a industry federation that most of the distributors are members of, and there's an audit process from the federation to the member to make sure that they're providing compliant products as well.
Okay. And the distributors generally independent, or they're almost umbrella companies of the manufacturers at some points?
A bit of everything. So there are global brands who are distribution businesses in the UK and European space, and there are also small independent companies.
Cool. It's just like an underworld, health and safety. When I first jumped into it 4 odd years ago, I thought it was very straightforward, but there's so many moving parts in every single aspect of it.
Very much so, yeah.
And what are the most common PPE related mistakes that you've seen in workplaces over the years? Is there something that people are always doing wrong, or a piece of equipment that are always being used incorrectly, or a piece of equipment that's always being ignored where it shouldn't be? Is there anything really prevalent that you see time and time again?
I guess working at height would probably be one of the riskiest areas, and one of the areas where most of the smaller contractors don't take as seriously as they might. So you often see people on roofs, doing work on chimneys or replacing roofs or repairing roofs with no protection whatsoever, either because they don't understand what they need, or that's the way they've been taught and trained, so they just keep doing it. But clearly, if you fall, then you risk dying. So it's not something you want to do lightly. But there's probably a huge gap of knowledge in that sector particularly.
Yeah, nice. We're actually cover this exact problem features, but today's purpose of the call is not for me to speak about our product, so I will leave it. And what do you suggest using as appropriate means to protecting against working at height in terms of PPE?
I mean, there are lots of the major challenge is finding the appropriate anchor point. So if you're on a industrial building, then there are anchor points built into the structure normally when they build it. Not always, but often. If you're on a residential property, there isn't. So then you're looking at there are different ways of creating an anchor point. For example, you can replace a tile with something that can you can connect onto a beam or a structure to give yourself an anchor point, and then you can connect to that and protect yourself whilst you're climbing either up and down the ladder or actually on the roof itself. So it's just understanding what you need to do to be able to do that and what you can achieve. And there are lots of training organisations that can help with that sort of process. But people believe they're superhuman and nothing will ever happen to them. That's the reality of lots of people in the world. That's what they believe. So that's what happens.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like safety so calculated, and everyone's wearing their hard hats and their high vis and everything, and then you realise that once the doors are closed, half of this stuff just gets thrown to the side, even if the boss.
Absolutely. Yeah. That certainly happens. And then probably the most difficult ones to convince people to wear are things like respiratory protection and hearing protection, because it's a long-term injury potential rather than an immediate. So with a safety spectacle, somebody hits your eye, you think, great, I'm glad I wore those. With hearing protection, for example, or hearing, you probably won't notice the effects for 20 or 30 years. And that's the point at which you'll become, deaf or semi-deaf and wish you worn hearing protection 20 years ago. And that's the most challenging area to get the message across to the wearer.
How do you as a company able to influence that behaviour, or does it generally work best if someone's at the company 20 years prior has had a hearing loss claim, and then all of a sudden everyone goes, hang on a second, this is real.
Well, exactly. So the larger companies are obviously very aware of that, and the insurance companies of those companies. So they take it much more seriously than the smaller ones that don't understand it as well. But yeah, you're right. Someone who's been there, for 20, 30 years and has an issue is much more likely to influence the younger people than, me going along and saying you should be wearing hearing protection.
Yeah. It's such a fine balance. The teacher-student analogy, where you're just being scolded the whole time and expected to behave.
Exactly.
Executive managers are always struggling with this exact issue.
Very much so.
And then what else have I got here on my magical question list? So coming back with health and safety culture, how have you seen the distribution of PPE being accepted? So when, not just within hearing loss in particular, but just in generally, if someone's expected to wear eye-vis every time, always expected to wear eye protection, always expected to wear whatever, how is this best given out to ensure that people actually wear it and don't just stick it behind a closed door once the boss walks away?
So a lot of it is education and training. So it's making the wearer aware of why they're wearing it, what's important, what they're protecting against, what's the risk. I think on the educational piece, if you can educate the user to understand more, they're much more likely to wear it, and then train them on how to wear it, what to do with it once they're taking it off, how to store it, how to clean it, etc. That again massively helps, and also to give people a choice. Often, people will buy the cheapest they can get to be compliant, and then it's horrible to wear, uncomfortable, no one wants to wear it, and you obviously get the effect of people not wearing it. So yeah, it's training, education, and choice. I would say the three major elements.
And by choice, you give the your own responsibility. If you want to wear this, you keep yourself safe, and otherwise it's up to you. or choice more on just the quality of the goods that you're going to give them, but they're going to have to?
Well, I think it's like anything else. If you're shopping in a clothes store or a shoe store and you see you got something, in grey or blue, or in one material or another material, you're much more likely to actually buy something than not. Whereas if you're given the choice of, this or nothing, you're probably not going to buy it because you want to be involved in the process. So it's the same with PPE. If you give somebody a choice of different styles of safety spectacle, for example, or different qualities of safety boots, and often people will say, right, you've got a budget of £30. If you want to get something better, you can, but it's your own money. People will actually do that because they've got the choice. They want to feel comfortable. They want to feel like they're involved in the process. And so, yeah, it's like anything else. You're a consumer. You're wearing something. Therefore, what you look like is important to you. So if you're given that ability to have something that you look good in and feel good in, you're going to wear it.
We're all just someone. I'm thinking like you go to a coffee shop and offer you a small, medium, or large, and you pick the medium because it looks like the best price. When really, there's sold in it. Well, yeah, it's a wild world. But then to make something look good or to make something feel good, how have you seen that change over time? Like, was PPE when you first started 35 years ago always ugly, or is it largely the same thing?
I wouldn't say it's ugly, but there was definitely less innovation, less choice, fewer options and fewer manufacturers than there are now. I mean, the UK market in particular now is absolutely swamped with different manufacturers from all over the world. So there's so much choice out there. Often one of the challenges the end user has is, or the companies have, is understanding what's available. Because, ultimately they're limited to what the purchasing people have contracted and what the distributors are supplying. So yeah, it's very much a different world in that respect. There's so much more choice and so much more, so many more options available that it actually helps the user to actually have something they'll actually like to wear.
Yeah, I really couldn't get the health and safety. And honestly, there's 100 stores with different levels of PPE. It was clueless. I've been working in the sector for the last 4 years, but yet still, unless you're Googling and going through the rounds and rounds of pages, you don't know how diverse, like there's 50 different hard hats in one room. How does this exist?
Exactly. Yeah.
But what have you seen by means of like cutting edge trends in PPE in particular? Is it the use of?
I think there's been a number of themes, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years. Obviously, recycled products or products that can be recycled is a major trend at the moment, and so there are a lot of manufacturers working in that space, anywhere from safety glasses through to safety boots. There are a lot of different ways manufacturers are approaching that, with using different materials that they never thought they'd be able to use, through to having programs to recycle the products once at the end of their life. So that's a major theme. The second major theme at the moment is ladies PPE. So most manufacturers are now developing specific products for female workers that, again, are more designed around the size of the face or the size of the feet or the size of the body. And so women are starting to now have choice, rather than just wearing a man's small size. They've actually got something that's designed for them. So they're the sort of two major trends, and probably the third one is what happened with COVID. So particularly in the respiratory sector, so much more innovation since COVID, because companies had to react and respond to what was going on.
I mean, that's existing version. We were selling wearables in the pandemic, pivoted into health and safety.
Right.
But then, have you seen lots of use cases of technology being integrated within PPE, where you get, I don't know, gloves that have actual temperature checkers in them, or goggles that have like a screen behind them, or like?
I would say not yet. I think the limitation is always the standard, so you can't push too hard unless the standard changes, because there's no you can't bring a product to market unless it meets the standard. So the standard is a very limiting factor that sort of blunts innovation or prevents too much innovation in those particular areas. The standards are evolving and things are starting to open up a bit more, so you are seeing more innovation. I would guess the biggest area of change in terms of electronics would probably be in things like powered respirators or firefighters' self-contained breathing apparatus, for example, where you've got a lot more monitoring of environments and situations in things like vibration, tool vibration. You've got a lot more innovation there. Hearing protection, you've got in-ear monitoring now of noise and sound. So in that respect, yes, there is a lot more innovation electronically, which is helping companies in particular understand what's happening. But in the lower cost PPE, not so much, because there's not the desire or space to actually do very much there.
Sure. So then companies that are innovating kinds of PPE, latest and emerging tech, do they then get stuck at kind of the gates of distribution because it's not set for regulation? Or just they don't?
No, I think once people are innovating and they can get the product through the safety standard, the market is adopting it because users are seeing the value, and then distributors are following that trend. So I don't think the distribution channels are a barrier, but any more than they normally are. but I think because of social media, particularly, you can push and promote lots of new innovation technology, and users find it and then ask for it, and then the market changes.
Yeah. So there is it's still constantly moving forward, just maybe not via traditional distribution means.
Yeah.
Have you ever sparked any? I mean, probably if you have, you may not even want to say. Have you ever sparked any ideas for like outrageous innovation within PPE? Like when we were trying to figure out our social distancing device, because we saw these hats with big phones around them for 2 meters. Similar ideas over the years.
You do see some really far out stuff, but it's not. It never actually gets to market in reality. And people are obviously, major companies are constrained by budgets and won't spend what they don't have to spend. So it's the whole thing is like a closed circle. So if you can come up with innovation that people value and meet standards, you've then got to convince the regulatory bodies that it's safe to use and can be used in that environment, and then it's down to how much monitoring is important and how you do it, and do you confine its PPE, or do you have it running alongside it, I guess. So again, coming back to the standards are such a constraint in that space that you can't do too much. You can do certain things, but not too much.
So we're not going to see it around a construction, building balls or
Probably not.
And then move on to the next question. What role do you find that risk assessments play in PPE selection and decision making and purchasing?
Like they always have, enormous. That's the whole basis for selecting PPE in the first place. So the risk assessment is the methodology to assess what's going on in the workplace, what the hazard is, can the hazard be prevented completely so the worker's always protected, or do you need to provide some PPE to protect the worker because there's no way of controlling the hazard that's being generated. So the risk assessment is actually fundamental to any PPE that's specified, and PPE is ultimately the last resort. It's if you look at the hierarchy of controls, it runs down from elimination to suppression to how can we remove the person from that environment, and if it's not possible, then PPE is selected as a last resort and then provided, and that's always been the way of assessing. You don't throw PPE in first and then try and solve it. You try and solve it and then use PPE as a control mechanism.
Oh, God. So you never see a brand new construction site being thrown up and then just impulsively purchasing PPE. They'll always do the risk assessment prior to making that decision, like, across the board.
They should do. Yes, they should do always. Yeah. Again, it depends on size of company and scale, etc. If it's a small contractor, they'll be led by what they've seen before and what they've been trained and told to do. But they should also be risk assessing what's going on that site, because it may be different to another site.
I genuinely love hosting these webinars, because I said it before, but my knowledge is like I had no idea that was actually the case. I knew, of course, risk assessments existed and people used them, but I thought that was almost a secondary to just impulse or just, I think we need this, or I think we need this.
Not at all. No. Very, very important.
You've just blown my mind. That could change the whole purchasing decisions for spacebands, but that's so then for my last question, if you could change one thing about the PPE industry, what would you change?
I think probably to try and prevent non-compliant PPE being purchased. So there, like every industry and every market, there are people who manufacture things and then pretend they're certified or pretend they're compliant, and we see that a lot in the industry, where people buy from, I don't know, a web platform, whatever that might be, or even a large builder's merchant thinking they're trusted, and then when you actually see the product, it's not been tested properly. It doesn't perform. It hasn't got the right labeling. Hasn't got the right paperwork. There's nothing good about it. And the British Safety Industry Federation actually championed this in the UK, and they go out and they test random products to see if they're compliant, and often find they're not. And then they unfortunately have to rely on government bodies to enforce, which ultimately they haven't got the right level of resource to do that. So yeah, I would say if you can change anything, it's preventing non-compliant PP from hitting the UK, European, well, every market in the world really, and obviously some countries worse than others.
But how could you use that purchase? The risk assessment, which PP would be purchased, let's say, could they say, hey, this is a list of trusted brands for X or Y? Or is it instead the distributors themselves, or? Yeah,
it's a combination of distribution businesses doing the right thing and sourcing from the right manufacturers and ensuring that the products are actually compliant rather than not. I would say that's the major thing. And secondly, I guess trying to prevent products through customs and through controls of borders from getting into countries and then being used, people potentially being at risk.
Yeah, and if you're using non-compliant PPE, would you be penalised for that, or instead it would just be taken from you and you'd be told to go and buy the right thing?
Firstly, it would be taken from you. If you weren't aware, that you can't blame the user for that, because they need to trust their supplier. The supplier is the people that should be penalised for that. And yeah, it's trading standards basically that police that. And plus the HSE will, if they did an inspection, they found something, they would also close the site potentially until that problem was rectified. So that's, yeah, they're the sort of different ways and means of doing that.
It's a whole world. My knowledge is still limited in.
It's very challenging, let's say.
Yeah.
And I guess if I was going to pick a second one, I would say for the whole industry to be less price driven. So a lot of people see it as a burden rather than something that's important. Yeah. But if you think about, a construction worker, as we've touched on construction a few times, construction worker who's working, 8 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, and when they're at home on a weekend, they're wearing comfortable trainers because they feel comfortable in that, and it supports them and it supports the body and makes them happy at home and doing sport and stuff. And then they go to work and they're wearing £20 pair of boots. That's incredibly uncomfortable, is damaging their body effectively because it's not taking any stress out of the joints, etc. And they're coming home with blisters and sores and hot feet and all sorts of other stuff that might be going on there. And you ask, well, why is that happening? It's because the people buying the stuff aren't valuing what the user's doing. So why should it be so price driven? It should be based on what the job they're doing, how many hours they're having to stand in that environment, and therefore what price should they be paying for that type of PPE. So that's to me the frustrating thing sometimes, is people don't value what they're providing their employees.
Because generally speaking, is PPE shared between a workforce, or is it bought for the individual and then they retain ownership of that on site?
It's bought for the individual because it's workplace safety, and they're providing it for their work safety. It's the employer's responsibility to do that and pay for it.
So really, can we fix the problem by giving the individual their own budget to go and choose what they want?
That's one way of doing it. Obviously, you need to control that they're buying something that is still compliant with, against the risk assessment. So that's challenging. But it's more about, I think, giving them a choice. You can have this product or this product or this product. We'll fund this one. We won't fund these, or we'll fund all of them, and you can choose based on what you think. Because a lot of it is like anything else, Ronan, it's value. So if you go and buy a pair of Oakley specs, right, you'd expect them to last a year or two as a consumer because you spent £100 on a pair of specs. If you buy something from Costco that costs £3.50, you might think it might last 2 or 3 months and probably get a new one. It's all relative, right? So you buy a £20 pair of boots, it's not going to last more than 6 months. If you buy a £100 pair of boots, it'll probably last 18. That's normal stuff because it's based on the materials used and the construction of the product.
I have this exact deal. On site with customers, myself a pair of £20 boots those years ago. I hate putting them on.
Not surprisingly, yeah.
But cool. I mean, that's all my questions for today, really. Thank you very, very much for speaking. We've managed to keep this roughly to half an hour, which is unbelievable because I have a tendency to just waffle on. So I've been trying to train that lately. But honestly, thank you so much for taking the time. How can people reach you if they want you to come and help their business with PPE?
So my website is ppe-specialist.com, and my email is peter@ppe-specialist.com. Very happy to help people everywhere we can. It's all about promoting PPE in the industry and the wider market, and keeping people safe.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. So I will close off the recording for now and hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Ronan. Take care.